Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker, and thank you for watching A Healthcare Z. Today's topic is how to build a healthcare sales machine. So, I personally have been involved with multiple healthcare startups, and I have literally seen how important the org chart is to growing revenue for that startup. So I'm going to go over an org chart for sales and marketing and account management and business development that I have seen highly successful in going from zero to tens of millions, approaching $100 million of revenue. Now, of course, when you think about revenue on the executive team in the org chart, you have the CEO, but then of course you think of the quote-unquote chief revenue officer. And specifically, this needs to be the chief revenue officer for just new business, for just new sales. Now that CRO for new business has three major responsibilities. They have marketing, lead generation, and sales. Now, for marketing, that person is responsible for events, for inbound marketing, in other words, leads coming in through their website, the blogs, video content, webinars, and also all generating all the sales collateral as well. Now, lead generation or prospecting needs to be its own separate department. It's not sales, it's not marketing, it's in between, but it still reports to the head of new business development, the chief revenue officer for new business. And this is an Aaron Ross model from the book Predictable Revenue, and we used it at Compass, hugely successful, okay? So this is not based upon some sort of theory. This worked for Aaron Ross, who by the way built this at Salesforce.com, and it also totally worked at Compass, and it worked at other healthcare startups that I worked at as well. Now, you have lead generation that nurtures the inbound leads that come in through marketing. Plus, you have lead generation that does all the outbound lead generation. In other words, prospecting in terms of list generation and list maintenance, cold calling, cold emailing, and cold LinkedIn messaging. Having initial conversations to see if there is interest in the prospect. And if there is interest in the prospect in learning more, they then pass that lead off to the sales representatives. And the sales representatives are the quota-carrying reps. Now they themselves have their own Rolodex of relationships that they're working, but in addition to that, they're also working people through the sales cycle of issues of fit, issues of risk, issues of price, and also working through the contracting as well till full sales. Now, this obviously in a healthcare startup, this is obviously done in combination to direct business to business marketing, lead generation, and sales, and then oftentimes it's done through the broker benefit consultant channel as well. Now, that is all just new business chief revenue officer. Okay, what is not the chief revenue officer's responsibility? Account management. Why? Because account management is the responsibility of the COO. Because what's the role of account management? Account management's role is to decrease churn and to actually do upsells. Well, how do you decrease churn and how do you upsell existing customers? You have to create customer delight. Okay, so the account management teams, their goal is to create customer delight. What does customer delight require? It oftentimes requires iterating and improving the operations of the business. And so you need to have, what does account management constantly need? They constantly have to go to operations and be like, hey, this customer wants this customization, this customer wants this change, this customer needs that change, right? So you have that automatic feedback loop between the customers and the COO. Because otherwise, if the COO is not responsible for account management, then when account management comes to operations and said, hey, we need these changes, what does operations say? They say no, because making customers delighted is more work. And the default response from the head of operations is, no, we don't want to do the work. But if you make operations responsible for the churn, if you make them responsible for the upsells, as part of their performance review, then you have this beautiful feedback loop to actually improve your product in response to customers. Not because of some sort of like internal agenda or echo chamber, but because you're literally listening to the customers. And that's gonna make your product or service 1,000,000 times better. Now, separate from the Chief Revenue Officer of New Business and the COO, you also then have the VP of Business Development. And the VP of Business Development is doing partnerships where the company's service or solution is baked into another distribution channel. That distribution channel in healthcare is typically like a carrier or a TPA or a PBM, or it could be a broker, or it could be an accountable care organization, it could be a Medicare Advantage plan, et cetera, et cetera. But this is where your company isn't actually selling to the customers, it's baked into an overall solution. Now, what does that baking in process involve? That also involves a lot of customization from operations and also from technology, the CTO as well, because oftentimes it has to do with things like white labeling it, or doing various customizations for those specific partners that you're baking yourself into. So it needs to be its own separate responsibility of revenue. Now look, on the executive team, you now have 1, 2, 3 positions that are responsible for revenue. So you have essentially distributed out revenue responsibility to more members of the executive team. And that is super important because I have seen many healthcare startups fail where they have all of the responsibility for revenue generation with one person on the executive team, the chief revenue officer. And that is a horrible idea for many reasons. One of which is the chief revenue officer is now outnumbered by everybody else on the executive team. And so what does everybody on the executive team do? They gang up on the chief revenue officer because they have their own priorities and their own agendas that are not revenue generating. And what does every healthcare startup, what is every healthcare startup's #1 problem? It is generating revenue. So essentially, if you're the CEO, you need to hedge your bet. You can't place all of your revenue responsibility with one person. That's a disaster. You're not mitigating revenue risk. The best way to mitigate revenue risk is to spread out that, just to diversify, is to spread out your revenue responsibility among multiple executives. Now you still have a CTO, you still have a CFO, maybe you still have a CHRO, but now you have 3 of the 6 members of the executive team reporting to the CEO who are now focused on revenue. And it creates this dynamic within the executive team where so much more of the time and the attention is focused on revenue. Believe it or not, it is incredibly common for healthcare startups to not focus on revenue, where they need to be focused on revenue on a daily and weekly basis. Now, this is for companies between 0 and 100 million in revenue. This will get you up that far, which is pretty far. Now, when you're super small, you might not have 7 people on the executive team, the CEO and then the 6 other members, but you still have to have these hats. And so at Compass, when we started with just 3 founders, the CEO was also the COO, was also the CHRO, and was also the CFO. We had our own CTO, and then I was responsible for the Chief Revenue Officer of New Biz and Business Development. In the beginning, we actually had account management with me as well, and that was a horrible idea. And then when we moved it, it became much more successful because of that feedback loop that I said. So as you grow over time, then you start taking some of these responsibilities away from the CEO and from these other people, and then you build teams underneath them. But these are the hats that need to be worn. These are the roles that need to be filled. And if you can get the right people and the right processes and the right technology in this organizational structure, then it can be highly successful. But if you have the people and you have the processes and you have the technology, but if it's not in the right accountability structure and the right accountability relationships, then it will fail horribly. So here's a way to build a healthcare sales machine. I wanted to share that with you today, and thank you for watching A Healthcare Z.